Hey guys, Constance here from CosmopolitanCornbread.com. So I'm getting ready to make some homemade biscuits. This biscuit recipe is one that I have had on my blog for many years. I spent a long time trying out different recipes, trying to find ways to make biscuits that were just right. And this recipe, we called these the winning biscuits because these are the ones that won out. Everybody in the family loved them, and I have made these countless times over the years. And the great thing about this recipe is these biscuits also freeze very well. So you can make a batch of these, pop them in the freezer, and just get them out as needed for breakfast or whatever you want to enjoy them as. So to get started, I just need a mixing bowl. I need a pastry blender. If you don't have one of these pastry blenders, you can use a couple of knives and just kind of crisscross them in the ingredient. Alright, first off, I need 2 cups of all-purpose flour. Now I need 2 cups of flour for the dough itself, but I'm not done with the flour, so you don't want to put it away quite yet. Next is 4 teaspoons of baking powder. Alright. And then a teaspoon of salt. I'm just going to take my pastry blender, give those a quick stir. Next I need 2 tablespoons of sugar. Give it a stir. Now for the real reason you need the pastry blender, and that is to cut butter into the dough. Now you always want your butter to be cold because that will give your biscuits a great texture. So I'm just cutting the butter into thin slices, and then I'll take those slices and I'll cut those into smaller pieces in the process. Now another thing that you could do if you wanted to is actually freeze your butter and then grate it with a cheese grater. That's another option. Then you wouldn't actually have to use a pastry blender at all. You would just stir it into the dry ingredients. So that is an option if you wanted to go that route. Like for instance, if you don't have a pastry blender, that would be a way of doing that as well. Now you're going to take your pastry blender and you're going to cut the butter into the dry ingredients. And to do that, you're just going to press it down through the butter and use the wires to literally cut the butter. And I do this in kind of a twisting motion to mix it while it's cutting. And when you first get started, you'll occasionally have pieces of butter stick to the pastry blender. So I just keep my knife or my leveler handy and just get it loose. If your butter is nice and cold, it's going to do it a little bit less. Whereas if your butter starts softening, it'll stick to the wires more. And so having that nice cold butter is pretty important. Now you're going to do this until your pieces of butter are no bigger than a pea. So you want all of the pieces to be relatively small. And you'll do it just until you don't have any more big chunks. Now, like I said, if you don't have a pastry blender, you can do this with a couple of knives. And the way you would do that is you would take two knives and you would just crisscross them like scissors through the ingredients, like this. Again, until all of the pieces of butter are no bigger than the size of a pea. So now the last ingredient to go into your dough is some milk. And this is just regular, ordinary milk. It's not buttermilk or anything like that. I'm using whole milk. Now this recipe will call for about 3/4 cup plus a couple of tablespoons. So I've got 3/4 plus 2 tablespoons in my measuring cup here. I'm going to start with the 3/4 cup and just leave a little bit of the milk in the measuring cup. The reason now the exact amount that you're going to need is going to vary according to your flour, according to just the moisture in your ingredients. You want to combine this until it just starts to come together. You don't want to use any more milk than you have to, because the more milk you use, the firmer your biscuits are going to be. So you want to use only as much milk as you need to wet the ingredients, but not make it mushy. So here you can see the dough. It's not soft, it's not pretty. It's kind of looking a bit chunky, and that is what it should look like. There should be moisture in the dough, but it shouldn't be all together. So now I'm going to take some flour and I'm going to sprinkle my surface, because now we're going to make the biscuits. You're going to take the dough, flour your hand so it doesn't stick to your hand, pull it out onto your counter or your work surface, and you're going to just press it all together. Again, you want to make sure you flour your hands, that way the dough does not stick to you. So you're just going to flatten this out into a great big disc that's about 3/4 of an inch thick. And then you're going to take your biscuit cutter, flour it, and cut straight down. You'll place your biscuit on a baking sheet or baking stone like I have here. And these biscuits do not touch when they're baking, so you give them a little bit of space. Alright, now once you get to where you've just got a bunch of scraps here, you're again going to flour your fingers just a little bit, and then take the scraps and press them back together, once again into a disc. So this recipe will make somewhere between 9 and 11 biscuits, depending upon how thick or thin you actually pat out your dough. Now I'm going to take the last of these scraps, pick them all up, because I don't want to waste them, and I'm just going to press them together and form one more biscuit. It'll be a little bit smaller than the rest of them, but that's okay. I don't want it to go to waste. So now it's time to bake them. These will go into your oven at 425 degrees for 10 to 12 minutes. I always check at the 10-minute mark to see if they are about ready, because you can always leave them in longer. You can't unbake overbaked biscuits. Alright, so there you go. Perfect, beautiful, just lightly golden, moist biscuits. And this is the recipe that I have made probably hundreds of times for my family over the years, and we love these biscuits. Mr. Smith loves these biscuits, and they're just classic. You can get a printable version of this recipe on my blog, cosmopolitancornbread.com. I will put a link to it down below underneath the video, so you can print the recipe out, or you can save it on Pinterest, however you like to save all of your recipes. One quick note, one thing that a lot of people ask about when it comes to making biscuits is that they have issues with the bottoms of their biscuits getting hard. One of the reasons that that happens is often because the baking sheet that they are using is much too thin, and it allows the bottoms of the biscuits to get too hot too fast. And the way you would fix that is by using a heavier baking sheet. You could also line it with parchment paper. Sometimes that can help. But personally, I absolutely love using a baking stone, because the baking stone comes up to temperature gradually, so your biscuit begins baking and it kind of shields the bottom, so you never get those burnt bottoms and tough biscuits. So that's, I always bake biscuits like this on a baking stone. You could also use cast iron if you've got a cast iron griddle, because that is also heavier and it's going to heat up a little bit more slowly. That would be an option as well. So I hope that helps. And if you have any other questions about making homemade biscuits from scratch, leave them in the comments and I will be sure to address them. So thanks for hanging out here in the kitchen with me today and baking some homemade biscuits. My name is Constance from Cosmopolitan Cornbread, and I'll talk to you all next time.